You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, hosted by two teachers who break down a different propaganda song each episode. Today we're talking about Bringer of Greater Things, track 5 from the fourth full-length LP, Potemkin City Limits. Potemkin City Limits was released on October 18th, 2005, almost 15 years ago by Fat Records. It's their last record for Fat Records, which bummed me out a lot, but isn't surprising.
Ha! Interesting. Keith, what do you think about Potemkin as a whole?
Oh man, I remember going back when I first heard Empires, taking the bus to Best Buy and listening to it in my dorm room. This one I drove my Camaro with my T-tops down to Barnes and Noble, bought this at Barnes and Noble, and drove around my campus like all day blasting this. I was hooked right away. As soon as I heard this album, it was it instantly replaced Empires for me.
Oh my gosh. That is really interesting because in an earlier episode you mentioned the Vice article where Chris ranks the propaganda catalog, and I found that article after you said that. I didn't even know it existed, and he ranked Potemkin as his third favorite record. And he did this before Victory Lap came out, so the order of his preferences might have changed now. But in the interview and also on his podcast, he talks a lot about how this record received like no attention, and how it flopped, and how it hasn't received attention very much at all until actually recently, which I have some theories about now that I've been thinking about this for like a week. But what's so funny, if I think about back on this time period, I saw Propaganda in St. Louis in 2005, and there was not that many people at the show, and the people in the audience stood around with their arms folded, sort of. And the Beeve was playing guitar, so they were on a tour as a 4-piece supporting a record they recorded as a 3-piece, and the audience was kind of like arms folded. I don't remember it being a crazy show. And then, so like to me, when Chris says like this record didn't do very well and that it didn't receive any attention, like to me the mood at that time period resonates like at the show. But then, like, I saw them in 2012 after Failed States came out, and the audience was insane. And if you go look at Chris's Twitter from the day after the St. Louis show on the Failed States tour, he goes, "That was wild. Thank you, St. Louis." So it's like such an interesting era because, like, you said you loved it. Yeah. I feel like I loved it at the time, but Chris has a totally different impression.
Yeah, I saw them for the first time in early 2007, and I remember mostly people going off during the older tracks, and I didn't know them. I couldn't sing along. I wasn't really moved by them. A lot of stuff I remember they played that I didn't know what it was off the top of my head, and I even ran into an old friend who I didn't realize was a fan of them, and he's like, yeah, this new album's okay, but today's Empires is like the best album of all time. And I wasn't going to argue with him about a record there, like standing around in a crowd, but I definitely disagreed.
Man, and so Potemkin to me, and I'm so glad we're finally getting into this record as well on this podcast, but Potemkin was like a turning point for this band, I feel like, in so many ways. Right. On Empires, which was Todd Kowalski's first record in the band, Todd sang 3 songs on Empires, and on Potemkin he sang 5 songs. Cut into the Earth, followed immediately by Bringer of Greater Things as tracks 4 and 5, then Impending Halfhead and Life at Disconnect, which is another some back-to-back Todd songs, and then Super Bowl Patriot 36, which leads into Iteration as track 11. And I think that Impending Halfhead should actually be track 2 on this record, holding up the holding up the Empire's format of Mate Khan and then Border. So it's like, I think that they should have readjusted the track listing to where Half Head was track 2 on Potemkin. But Todd's up to 5 songs on this record as a vocalist. So it's like bringing Todd front and center in a lot of ways. Kind of reminds me how, like, in Alkaline Trio, Dan Andriano only sang 2 songs on their first record, but then, like, when they get into their later records, it's more 50-50 between Matt and Dan. So, like, this to me is like Todd's, coming forward as like a different kind of member of Propaganda. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and it's also a big stylistic shift because Empires is mostly like his tracks are hardcore punk. They definitely sound more like overlapping with his previous band, I Spy.
Mm-hmm.
And here you have a few of those, but still you have like this melodic kind of existential mid-tempo drastic switch in the songs that he sings on. And they're some of my favorite in their entire discography.
Yeah, and 3 of Todd's 5 songs on Potemkin are very brooding, slow, like thundering, like mid-tempo, almost slow songs. Some of the slowest songs Propaganda's ever done, I think,
Right.
are on this record. So we're going to talk about Bringer of Greater Things on this episode, and this is a powerful track. This is a deep track. We can never talk about all the things that this track elicits for us in our minds, like with events in the world and history and things like that. This track resonates to me on issues of police brutality, religious and territorial colonialism, cultural erasure. And it also is a direct tribute to 3 First Nations Canadian men, Rodney Nastis, Neil Stonechild, and Lawrence Wagner, who were all murdered by the police department in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And so we're going to get into that later on, I know. But first, we are going to go to our guest segment. So join me there. So we have a guest on this episode this week to discuss his love of Propaganda, his artwork, and his love of this particular song for this week, Bringer of Greater Things. He did the artwork for this show as well. So the guest this week on the show is Justin Santora, who is an artist and illustrator in Chicago. So Justin, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propaganda. It's so great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm wondering if you can just start off and maybe tell the audience a little bit more about yourself that I didn't say, and then also tell us how you first discovered Propaganda.
Well, I'm, as you said, an artist and illustrator. I've been illustrating professionally for about 11 years. I live in Chicago with my wife and 2 cats, and enjoy cold beer now and again. I like to go skateboarding. I like to travel. And I discovered Propaganda. I mean, they were a name I was familiar with for years. And I remember hearing Today's Empires, like part of it when it came out, and remember being kind of struck at how heavy it was because I didn't know they were that heavy, which of course I think a lot of people heard that album and were shocked by the lineup change and what those songs, they just went a way harsher, more thrash direction on that record. So I sort of, a few years after that album came out, kind of worked backwards or, went from the beginning. And I was listening to How to Clean Everything and Let's Talk More Rock. And then I gave Today's Empires a proper listen. And this was when I was about 19, 20. And I was really looking for some music that was more confrontational and more raw, more political. And it really spoke to me on a lot of levels. And I just became obsessed with them. I wanted to figure out what all the songs meant, the stuff that I didn't understand. I wanted to, do research and learn more about those topics. And they initially hooked me with the strong anti-racist, anti-homophobia, anti-sexist message. And that was sort of like the gateway drug to learning about U.S. imperialism and the prison industrial complex and so many things that they cover in their vast catalog.
Absolutely. I mean, the stories of every single Propaganda song are so immense. And I know that like we could talk about just one song for hours and hours because there's always some kind of strong history behind it. But Keith and I talk about this all the time about how intense those ideas were that were put forth for us as well. So, whenever we talk about all the messages that you just talked about, anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-homophobia, those are a big deal when you're like 18, 19 years old and you're going into the world and you're realizing how complex everything is. So, I mean, like, was Propaganda sort of like your gateway into like becoming sort of an adult in a way and like analyzing the real world issues that were facing us?
Yeah, absolutely. I became a lot more aware of what was going on in the world because then I started reading more about these issues and becoming more impassioned about them. And the stronger of an understanding I got, the more sort of dejected and demoralized I felt about the state of things in the world, which that band is there for you when you feel that way, because these are these other humans that were feeling the same way about it, and they just have a gift of being able to express it a little more poignantly than others, and that's why they are the band they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're this great shoulder to cry on because they felt that way too, but they can just articulate it way better than I ever could.
Yeah. Do you remember, were there any like books that were like listed in those early records, or that you heard them talking about in interviews or anything that you then springboarded off and then read yourself to dive a little more deeply into some of the issues that you were mentioning?
Yeah, any Chomsky that I've read or listened to talks of his,
Yeah.
or then you used to be able to like go to a Propaganda show and buy like a Chomsky DVD, and it would just be of him giving a talk.
Yeah.
You like watch it once, and you're like, wow, that's crazy. And I just got these Chomsky DVDs that I've only watched once.
Yeah, when they put them out on G7 too, it was pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, it was so punk of Chomsky to do that.
What else were you listening to around that time? Like whenever Empires came out, like what were some of your bands that were also in your like world that you jumped off of and started listening to more Propaganda?
Back when Today's Empires came out, I was like really into Jawbreaker and Jawbox, and other bands that don't contain the word jaw.
Yeah.
Yeah, like lots of Face to Face, and I was really into the Smashing Pumpkins around that time. Totally unrelated to punk, but
yeah,
just a band I was listening to a lot at the time. And
I saw them last summer.
Oh, cool! How was it?
It was great. It was an amazing show, and actually, funnily enough, AFI opened up, which was very interesting to see AFI in an amphitheater at 5:30 in the afternoon. Yeah.
Nice.
So you've done a lot of design work, and Keith and I found your work several months ago whenever you did some posters based on some Propaganda artwork from like around like Potemkin City Limits. How did you get involved in doing like poster design related to music?
That was a really weird chance meeting that I had. I already was a big fan of the poster artist Jay Ryan, and he's really well known. He's awesome, great person, great artist, and I was a big fan of his work. And just by chance, he came and spoke to my class my last year of college, and when he did that, I got an idea of how he got started, and I was just thinking in my head over and over again, I want to do that. And I kept thinking of schemes of finishing school and cobbling together a small print studio in my bedroom and starting to print posters for bands, because I wanted to be like Jay. I wanted to do what he and other artists in the Chicago scene were doing at the time, and still do to this day. And I graduated school. I started cobbling together a little setup and started trying to do work for local clubs, and started making art prints just to prove to myself and others that I could deliver on a product, actually like print it. And it sort of snowballed from there. And I've been doing it ever since.
Who were some of the bands that you first started doing prints for? Like, what was kind of like that sequence of events for you as an artist for working with bands?
There was a promoter in Connecticut who used to book a lot of bands and commission small runs of posters, usually for like the cost of materials, and then you'd be allowed to sell some extras that you'd print for yourself, and that would be all you get for payment. And it was not a model that I would support anymore, but it was a great way to get started. And it helped me build up a portfolio and become comfortable with the medium. And as time went on, larger clients started getting in touch about poster work, and I still do work for clients of all sizes. I kind of have a Steve Albini sliding scale.
Sweet. Nice. And you have done work for the band Propaganda. Like I have a print here that just came in the mail from you today, actually, because media.
That's the last one.
What? No way.
Yeah, that should be. Yeah, the same day someone else bought another one, and I'm all out, except for my archive copies.
Amazing. So it's a Propaganda Iron Sheik and La Armada. Did they sell this on tour? Was this a tour poster?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. How did you get involved with working with the band specifically?
Well, I had for a number of years just very occasionally traded emails with Todd, and once they came to town, and I just hit him up, and I was like, "Let me know if you want to grab dinner or something before the show." And I was like, "I know some good vegan spots," and he took me up on it. And I mentioned to him, like, "If you guys ever need posters, like, hit me up. That's what I do." And then a few years later, they asked me if I would do it. When Todd was in Chicago, he and I took a drawing class together. He's an excellent artist.
Amazing.
Other than being a really good musician, he also is a very, very talented artist.
Yeah, his Instagram, his portraits that he paints are unreal. His Chai Pig from SNFU portrait that he painted blew my mind.
Oh, yeah, he's great. Yeah, he's super good. And he's just constantly trying to develop and improve, and he's already got a really strong game. So he hit me up and was like, "Do you want to take this drawing class with me in Chicago? I want to come and take it." I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that. That sounds good." And we talked more about maybe working together during that trip when he was in town. And it didn't happen that they had an album out, around that time. So it took until the Victory Lap album that I started doing some poster work. I've done a couple of shirt designs. And,
that is awesome.
And it's totally like one of my absolute favorite clients to work for, because they're one of my favorite bands. I believe in everything that they stand for. I had a lot of trouble making sure I came up with images, though, that were like powerful enough. So I wanted to continue doing work for them, but I'm out of ideas right now. So nice. I would need to like really go back to the drawing board and really think of. So I know I can. It's got to, it's my job. I have to come up with ideas, but super into having had an opportunity to work with them. Yeah.
It's just fantastic. And, like all their records have a different tone, So like I was listening to Potemkin a lot today in preparation for our conversation about Bringer of Greater Things. And the record just has a tone that no other record has. So I'd imagine if there was like a new record and you're consuming it, you're probably having art ideas just flowing out of you. Listening to like different lyrical references, hearing the tone of an album. And does it come together that way? Like whenever you're hearing the music and ideas just start coming out of that?
Oh yeah. When it's an artist like whose catalog I'm really familiar with, especially. But then the other side of that is that I start feeling like immense pressure, because I know what the band means to me. And I know that it means a lot to a lot of other people. And I want to make sure that I come up with imagery that not only the band is stoked on, but their fans would be stoked to buy a shirt and wear it. And, it feels like a lot of pressure sometimes, like to not blow it,
Yeah. Well, and you live in a huge city too, in Chicago. Have you ever seen your shirt of any bands like walking around town?
Yeah, I have. I'm trying to think of examples. The Propaganda shirts were for European tours that I designed. So I haven't seen those like in circulation. But I have seen stuff that I designed for other bands. I just can't think of an example, but I do remember like nudging my wife and being like, I designed that shirt before.
Nice. So, Justin, I reached out to you several weeks ago to tell you about this project that Keith and I are working on, Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. And we thought of you because you did a Potemkin City Limits poster that Keith and I, we both bought and we both have at our houses. And so whenever I was thinking about doing this show, the idea came to me to reach out to you to talk about doing the logo artwork for the show, because I knew that you love the band just as much as we do. And I just had a feeling whenever I emailed you, like through your form on your website, that it would just work out. I just had a feeling. So can you talk to the audience a little bit about the artwork that you designed, and then maybe go about your thought process for the different ideas that you had? Because you had several different ideas.
Oh, right. There were other ideas.
Something on fire.
Oh, yeah. That was like the Failed States cover. One was referencing that.
Yeah. And then another one was the roller coaster imagery on the cover of Victory Lap. And you wrote to me in an email that you really liked the roller coaster, but that's not the one that we went with, which I think is really funny.
My idea was, because that's where the band is now, is working off of the Victory Lap album, that I thought maybe doing a drawing of a roller coaster would be an interesting idea in the sense that it's a ride that you're taking the viewers or listeners on.
Yeah.
And I like what we came up with better, which was the hand thumbing through their discography.
What does that image mean to you? Like being in a record store, seeing How to Clean Everything, Potemkin right behind it, flipping through the LPs. Like, what does that image like elicit for you as a music fan and as a fan of the band?
I think it'd be amazing to discover that band right now. And I came to them pretty late, considering they'd been a band for 15 years or something. By the time I discovered them, they were 3 albums deep. And I like to think of that image as kind of like someone stumbling upon it in a record store and being intrigued by the cover or some of the song titles, and then having this wealth of songs to go through. I mean, when you just get into a new band and you see what size of a catalog that they have, it makes it really exciting, that especially back in the days of buying albums. Now everything is streaming. You can get anything you want on demand.
Yeah.
But back when you would only get 1 or 2 records at a time, it would be really exciting to have just unlocked elements of the band still out there to be able to catch up on and get caught up with.
Nice. Well, now I want to talk to you a little bit about the song, The Bringer of Greater Things. So when I reached out to you at this project to talk about the artwork, I also said to you, what are some of your favorite songs of the band? And you sent me a big list. And the album that Keith and I were talking about this week, we wanted to talk about something from Potemkin City Limits. And you had mentioned to me that Bringer of Greater Things from Potemkin is one of your favorite songs that stand out to you and that really matter to you a lot. So what is it about this song, The Bringer of Greater Things from Potemkin, that really stands out to you? Just off the top of your head, why do you love this song so much?
Well, that's a pretty dark record. Like, if you think about when that album came out, it came out not long after Bush got reelected. And there was a lot of dread about U.S. foreign policy at the time, and rightfully so, I'd add. And a song like that, I think, is like peak darkness for that record. The tone and the message is just talking about these horrible crimes committed by police officers against indigenous humans in parts of Canada. It's a heavy song, and it's slower, like the previous album, everything was really fast, and this is like a mid-tempo song. It's got those haunting guitar bends, like after the opening line. The lyrics are heavy and were spot on, and it's heartbreaking, but it's such a rocking song.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know that you're, I know you've probably had some conversations with Todd over the years about the band. What is this? How does this song rank for you as far as like Todd's songs within the Propaganda catalog?
It's definitely high up there, but every record they put out, um, his songs just keep getting so good. Like,
Mm,
like Night Letters opening up, supporting cast. That was like whoa, this record starts with the Todd song, and it's just
bam.
like yeah, like just the way they use that as an element of surprise. But I would rank this one high up there personally because it always being a standout track on that record, and that record being a special one to me because I remember waiting on bated breath for that album to come out, and when it did, I just binged it. Like
Mm.
me and my friend Chad had a copy of it, and I just stood next to him, and he sat in his computer chair. We just listened to the whole thing, like start to finish.
Did you like it when it came out? Because Chris Hanna openly says that the record was panned, that it flopped, that nobody liked it. What was your initial reaction to it when it came out?
I was obsessed with it.
Okay, say more, because it was such a departure from Empires. What was it that grabbed you so much about the record?
I loved what they pulled off as a three-piece on that album. You can hear them really pushing themselves. And it also doesn't surprise me that they added another guitar player when they began touring on that record. Um, they're incredible musicians, and just hearing what they pulled off is like one last hurrah as a three-piece before they started this new chapter of the band. And then the things they can do as a four-piece is like infinite.
Mm,
Um, I think I think that album is, in the context looking back now that so many albums have come out since, that's such a cool transitional album because it's the last record they did as a three-piece. It's really a great snapshot of those Bush years,
hmm
what it felt like living through the frustration of those years politically,
Yeah.
and it's also such a cool taste of things to come,
Yeah.
while still being a really, really strong album on its own.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like, and Chris, I think, is kind of amazed watching the Bush legacy get sort of like swept under the rug right now. Like, I think that Americans have such short memories that now so many people are struggling to remember just how many messed up things were happening during those years. And, I think that revisiting the music from that time period, like another one that I really like is The Empire Strikes First by Bad Religion from that time period as
Oh
well.
yeah.
And I just think that it's really important to not forget the atrocities that came out of that first and second term of the Bush presidency. And I think that the tone of this propaganda record is so important for that time period. But it also, this song, Bringer of Greater Things, also holds Canada's feet to the fire as far as like the murdering of Indigenous men.
Yeah, which is an important message considering how common it was for people to say, if Bush gets reelected, I'm moving to Canada. And it's
Exactly.
like, yeah, oh, listen, guy, Canada's got problems too. And
Exactly.
it's cool that they were always quick to remind people of that.
Yeah, and like I have a Canadian friend who often says things like, "Yeah, Americans look at Canada as some kind of like beacon, but we have a really, really slick way of covering up all of our problems."
Sure, yeah.
And I just appreciate Bringer of Greater Things for like really shining a light, especially on the Saskatoon Police Department that they mentioned within the song, because that the trends of dropping people outside of town on minus 30-degree evenings and leaving them to freeze to death several miles outside of the city is an atrocious crime. And so as we look at what's going on in the United States right now, I think that paying attention to the ways that other countries are struggling with this police brutality and killing problem as well is an important lesson for all of us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It becomes they're one of those bands that like they're going to just keep aging great because the messages that they hit on are always relevant. Sadly, in a lot of cases, it's like I can't believe we're still talking about police brutality, but
Yeah. Well, Justin, we're super grateful to you for coming on Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, to talk about your work, your art, your history of loving this band, what they mean to you, the record Potemkin City Limits, the record Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes, and also the song Bringer of Greater Things. We've covered a ton of ground. So I'm hoping that you'll consider coming back on the show someday to talk about more songs. But in the meantime, before listeners hear you again, where can they find you online if they want to check out more of your fantastic artwork? Because there's so much of it to see.
Oh, you can check me out on Instagram at Justin Santora. It's JustinSantora, or justinsantora.com.
Awesome. Well, Justin, it's been really awesome having you on the show, and Keith and I are super grateful to you for your time and your contribution vocally and artistically to our project. So thank you so much for doing this, man.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
Keith, what did you like about having Justin on the show?
I think something that he said really connected with me was the pressure he feels as an artist to create something that stands up to the band's, their power and their meaning for so many people. And while I wouldn't say speaking into a microphone, I'm an artist, but I definitely feel pressure here, hoping that I could create something that fellow admirers and appreciators of the band will also enjoy. I liked his description of Potemkin as the end of an era in which the band is evolving. They are still pushing themselves musically. I mean, it's really complex, even if it isn't as fast as Empire's. And it has this really appropriate change, like kind of a last hurrah as a three-piece. What about you, Greg? What'd you think?
So I have two of Justin's propaganda artwork prints, and I've got one here. I know you have this one as well.
I do.
And so you can't see this, but I'm sure you can see this on Justin's Instagram or on his website. But it's a picture of a giant border wall topped with barbed wire, and it looks like a lot of the cement barriers separating the Gaza Strip from the state of Israel, and also the state of Israel from the West Bank territories. And at the bottom of the image is a blasted through hole, and the cement that has been blown out, the rubble is at the bottom of the hole. And then there are these little tree saplings that are springing up through the rubble at the bottom. And it's just powerful. So when Justin's talking about the pressure that he feels to deliver imagery that is appropriate for what a band like Propaganda has attempted to stand for their entire careers, and then you look at the artwork that he has created for them, that totally is true. I can't imagine.
I think he nails it.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically like, listeners may have varying opinions of this person, but he's almost like Propaganda's like Banksy or something in a way, Yeah,
and you can find that poster. You can find that poster on Justin Santora's Store Envy. It's the European Tour 2018. You should buy it because it's really powerful.
Yeah, awesome. So thanks again to Justin for coming on the show. And he also did the artwork for the podcast. So the artwork that shows up in your podcast player on your phone when you listen to this show, that was done by Justin. So thank you, Justin. You are awesome. Keith, I think we should talk about the music a little bit on this song, and then we'll talk about the lyrics and some of the stories that the song is based on, some of the things that we learned about. Tell me what you think about the music of Bringer of Greater Things.
Yeah, I think my first big takeaway is that I kept thinking that this could be, a quote unquote Chris song. On Empires, I said his tracks are a little bit more hardcore punk. He had this barking vocal style, and this song is really melodic, and his vocals here hit, I think, a really wide range. And in that way, I could actually hear Chris singing this track, which you sent me a video of earlier.
Yep, there's a Mosh Cam is an Australian concert video channel that I check out, and they have some fantastic propaganda videos. And After what was it called? After supporting cast came out, Todd lost his voice for some time and couldn't sing on tour for a while. I saw Propagandy twice on the supporting cast tours. I saw them first in England and then again in Saskatchewan, and he didn't sing at either show. However, there are some Propagandy songs that Chris took over singing when Todd couldn't sing. So if you go on YouTube and you search Bringer of Greater Things, just search for the song Bringer of Greater Things on YouTube, you'll see that Chris does sing this song, and he really nails it. I don't think that he should sing it all the time. It's not his song. But Chris really did a good job singing the song. And that really speaks to me to the power of this track, because if the guy who didn't write it says we still should play this, then that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I think musically also there's a great use of a Hammond organ in this. It adds atmosphere to it. You can hear it right at the beginning and at the end. It adds a sense of sadness and melancholy to the track, which is much needed. The liner notes for this album show that there's a Hammond organ on 3 songs, and I think this is by far the best use of that instrument. It's also a really good 1-2 punch of Todd's songs, with Cut Into the Earth coming just before this track. And like Justin mentioned, there's some really cool guitar leads with that hammer on and bend that like evoke a somber feel. Ultimately, it's kind of dialed back musically. It's not super complex. It's not incredibly technical. There's maybe a few like acrobatic transitions and to connect some sections together. But I think a big takeaway for me is that the music doesn't matter as much as the lyrics here.
Yeah. And, that's really an interesting point, too, because this song, to me, when this record came out, I was really challenged by the Todd songs on this record. And I'm glad that you mentioned that was a Hammond organ, because at the very beginning of that track for Bringer of Greater Things, I was like, is this a cello? Is this a double bass going wah, 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 wah? I wasn't sure. And then the music comes in and Todd hits you right off the bat singing. But the music is super like plodding and lumbering of a tempo for Propagandy. I was used to they left us on Empires with Purina Hall of Fame, like their fastest song with their craziest guitar solo that they've ever had.
A song that sounds like it's going to come off the rails at any point.
Absolutely. And I think Chris describes it exactly that way. I love it. And so they left us with Purina, and then they hit us with, tracks like Cut Into the Earth, Fadala's Hearse, Bringer of Greater Things, Life at Disconnect on this record. And it was a huge shift. And to me, like, Bringer of Greater Things is like very little else that Propagandy has ever done. Like, it's got elements of like bands like I was thinking about like Small Brown Bike, Avail, Hot Water Music, Leatherface. Like, that to me is kind of where the music is like sitting for me stylistically. It just reminds me of a lot of other bands that Propagandy had never reminded me of. Now, this is a really welcome thing for me. I welcome when bands experiment and change in their style. And, before the tone of Potemkin's Todd songs on Cut Into the Earth, Bringer of Greater Things, Life at Disconnect, these 3 mid-tempo, slower Todd songs on this record, these songs really brought Todd into a lot of special stuff into this band besides just his ragers,
Right.
These songs like challenged me in a new way for this band that none of their previous songs on Empires, Less Talk More Rock, or How to Clean Everything had ever done. Like, this is like a brand new curveball, massive curveball.
Was there any time, like when you first got the record, where you were tempted to maybe skip any of them?
Absolutely. I skipped them tons of times. I'm going to admit it. I was not a highly evolved Propagandy listener for a long time. I wanted those mind-melting guitar solos and the crazy, insane tempos. And I would get in the car and I would just go crazy for Back to the Motor League.
Yeah.
You know, I would go nuts for Purina Hall of Fame. And you know, but because I was getting like that shock, that emotional, like that energy, that testosterone rush, from those fast ragers with those crazy guitar solos, I didn't have to think about liking it. I didn't have to be like, do I like this or not? Because I was like, you know, I just wanted to listen to like, you know, No Use for a Name, Making Friends, or Propaganda, Purina Hall of Fame, and just rage out. So like these Todd songs forced me to grow a little bit.
Yeah, I think I had only been listening to them for maybe 2-3 years. So I wasn't too far of like an entrenched fan that had a super solidified like definition of what their sound was. So because of that, I think I was way more open to this big stylistic shift.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I think that Chris on his podcast, he talks about how Empires was just too fast. I think that album annoys him because people loved it so much because it was so fast. But I think that Chris was just like, oh my God, like he regrets it. And he's like, me and Todd made Jord play as fast as we could make him play. And we're like, play it faster, Jord. And so it cracks me up because then he talks about how in his rankings, how he likes this record, but that it also flopped. So,
yeah,
you know, while Empires was like crazy fast and started with Matika and then Border and then Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes title track, and then Back to the Motor League as the first 4 tracks, and it closed with Purina and that insane solo. Potemkin doesn't have any songs as fast as the stuff on Empires.
right.
It's dialed back a notch on speed, and it has this total sound departure on Todd's songs, and Todd sings more.
Yeah.
And the album fluctuates far more in dynamics than Empires does. So, and I also have like a track listing theory. Like, I think if this album had opened up with Speculative Fiction and then gone Impending Half Head and then Fidelis Hearst and then Fixed Frequencies in that 1, 2, 3, 4 order, it might have offered a bit more of a familiar album introduction to lure back in. You know, like Empires, you listen, you're like, whoa, this rips. And it's like, it's so easy to digest and listen to. But holy smokes, man, this album, Potemkin City Limits now, for me, is just like incredible. And I think it's like now at 36, I'm in a place where I can embrace and love every element of this record. I listened to the entire record today on my run. I was like, this is unbelievable. And I wonder how the 36-year-old Propaganda fans in 2005 felt about Potemkin compared to the 22-year-old Propaganda fans like me, who couldn't see it for what it was. But apparently you were highly evolved and you got it right away.
No, I just wasn't like an old punk. I wasn't an old head. So yeah, I do remember like the first 2 tracks they released online, if I remember, were Speculative Fiction and America's Army. And they're, again, those 2 are so different. So if that's the first taste that people got from the new record, it may not have necessarily hooked them, even though, of course, they're both amazing songs.
Yeah, well, and what's also interesting is that those are 2 of the 7 Chris songs. So when you hear those 2 songs and you're like, wait, I've already heard 2 of the only 7 Chris songs on this record. If you're a Chris fanatic, you're like, oh my God, like that this record isn't going to be nearly as good as I want it to be because it has less Chris.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a big deal. You know, people in bands with 2 singers are going to have their favorite person, the Lawrence Arms, the Goo Goo Dolls, whoever, you know, you're going to have your favorite person.
Who's your favorite? I didn't know there was 2 Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh, dude. Yeah. The first early Goo Goo Dolls records, like Robbie and Johnny both sing like equally. And they basically sound like the Descendants, like the Goo Goo Dolls album, Jed and Hold Me Up. Oh my God. If you haven't heard those records, everybody out there listening, go listen to old Goo Goo Dolls, man. It is crazy. It sounds like the Descendants. Keith, what do you think about the lyrics of Bringer of Greater Things?
Yeah, they're heavy. That's what Justin said a couple times. And there are a few things that really stand out to me. I think embrace this parody.
Yeah, tell me
Endure
about that,
this.
because I wasn't thinking about that in the song. There's too many other things I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So tell me about Embrace This Parody for you.
So combining that with endure this tragedy, wrap yourselves in our fantasies, there seems to just be, there's this gap between settler colonial devastation of First Nations peoples and communities and how colonizers view themselves and their legacies. Like, I think it's interesting that the song is told in the first person. Like, this is from the perspective of the colonizers. And obviously the lyrics are scathing in a critique of the dehumanization of First Nations peoples, the displacement of them, past and present, and how they're perpetrators of violence against Indigenous communities. And there's like this handoff, like you give up your independent community, you give up your way of life and your culture, and we're going to give you biological warfare and religious indoctrination. And there's this inability for the colonizers to acknowledge their impact on these communities.
Okay, yeah, no, and I wasn't even thinking about that as far as the lyrics go. I was looking today at the lyrics several times, and I didn't even allow myself to really focus on embrace this parody, endure this tragedy, wrap yourselves in our fantasies, because there were so many other things that I was grappling with within the song. And I think that first and foremost, the thing that I really latched onto were the stories of the three men who are listed at the end of the song but aren't actually included in the lyrics. So if you look at the song lyrics on Propagandy's website, or if you look at them within the LP or CD booklet, if you have those at your house still, you'll see the names of Lawrence Wegner, Rodney Nastis, and Neil Stonechild. And it says in the booklet that they were murdered by the Saskatoon Police Department. Lawrence Wegner's body was found outside Saskatoon on February 3rd, 2000. Rodney Nastis was found shirtless January 29th, 2000. And Neil Stonechild, who's a super famous story. If you spend any time in the prairie provinces in Canada, Neil Stonechild's a very famous name, but he was 17 when he was found frozen to death on November 29th, 1990 in a field on the outskirts of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And so like this song is so wide ranging for a 2-minute song. The lyric about this pattern of abandonment and murder against First Nations people in the song are: the city cops, a sub-zero night, a midnight ride out of town. The passenger was found frozen to the snow, our enduring legacy. So I used to live in Saskatoon. I did my master's degree in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is a very long story why I was there. But it was an incredible experience. And I learned so much about Canada and First Nations communities while living there. And this song, it really hit me because it's about a place that I spent 2 years of my life. I have so many memories of being outside in the middle of the night in Saskatchewan in January, and you will die like so fast if you are outside in a t-shirt, jeans, and shoes. You know, in 1990, Neil Stonechild was 17 years old, and he was discovered dead on the outskirts of town. And I think the police report says something along the lines of, he was at a party, he got drunk, he decided to go for a walk, he died because he froze to death on a walk. You know, what actually was happening is that these guys are getting arrested, and they drive outside of the city by the police officers, and these are called starlight tours in Canada. And they are kicked out of the car, sometimes very underdressed. They say, well, see if you can get back to town. and then the cops just drive away, and it's like literally like minus 30 outside.
Yeah.
So this is a pattern, it's a trend. So I'm really glad that you were focusing on some different parts of the lyrics, because I was just down a rabbit hole on police abandoning First Nations men on the outskirts of town, in a place where it's like regularly minus 30, minus 40 degrees in January and February. And like, if you've ever felt cold like that, listeners, you should experience it once in your life if you never have, because it is unbelievable to feel minus 40-degree cold. It is truly astonishing. So anyway, one of the things that I discovered is that a reason that the police started getting busted doing these things is because of one dude who survived. His name is Daryl Knight, and he's a Cree First Nations man who was dropped off outside of Saskatoon in like a freaking jean jacket on January 28th, 2000. And he was like miles away from town. And he survived by walking to the Queen Elizabeth Power Station, which if you Google map that, if you like go on your computer and you look up Queen Elizabeth Power Station in Saskatoon, you'll see that it's on the far, far south side of the town. And if you look at it closely, there is not much at all around that power station to this day. And Daryl Knight's abandonment was like 20 years ago. So it's now like more built up, but like it is like out there, man. And Daryl actually made it from the place where they dropped him off to the power station. And he made it because he grew up in Saskatoon and he knew like how far away it was. But I think that like Neil Stonechild like grew up in Ontario, in like the foster care system, and like had no idea about the geography of Saskatoon. So like Daryl Knight survived to tell the story, but Neil Stonechild, who was a 17-year-old kid, did not. So, Daryl survived, and he came to tell the story, and these abandonments became known in Canada as starlight tours, where officers like pick up somebody, they take them outside of town, they kick them out of the car, and Stonechild was kicked out of the car with one shoe on.
Yeah.
And most die. And so these are known as starlight tours, which doesn't, to me, it doesn't mean that they just drive them out of town in the middle of the night. To me, it also means like starlight is like the last thing you see when you lay down in the snow to look up at the sky before you die and freeze to death and, pass from this life into whatever's next.
So the two officers who admitted to dropping off Daryl Knight were suspended and then later fired, but there wasn't enough evidence for criminal charges against them. And after this, the Saskatoon Police Station's Wikipedia page was edited, and any reference to the freezing deaths, the starlight tours, was deleted. And an investigation traced the IP address to a computer within the police station. So they tried to cover the tracks and hide any of this information to the public.
Unbelievable. So if you're curious about about the lyrics in this song and that example, one place you can start is you can look up a Washington Post article called "Left for Dead on a Saskatchewan Night." It's a pattern that happened a ton. So that's one of the darker aspects of Canada that a lot of Americans and people around the world don't know about.
There's a really good podcast episode from Criminal. It's episode 138, and they talk specifically about this incident, which, since I mentioned the earlier history, I think it's just the updated version of our historical treatment of First Nation peoples. So we have earlier with smallpox blankets, right? And villages being kind of obviously just taken over and controlled and destroyed. And now our treatment is just, now our treatment of First Nation peoples is evolving to where we cannot acknowledge what settler colonialism has done to them. So we continue to just push them off into the outskirts and ignore them which is kind of what we've done historically.
Well, yeah. And like when I was living in Saskatchewan, I spent some time living in a rural town and an urban town. And one of the things that people would always say is like, oh, avoid town on Friday night because that's when all the First Nations get their checks, and then they go and they drink it all away, and they like are all in town. So it's like this massive, it's like this massively sad thing where it's not like, hey, how can our communities like band together and help each other? It's like, stay away from them on Friday nights because they're all going to be drunk. I mean, it like, and this is like, I was being told these stories in like 2008, 2009, 2010. So this is not like long ago. What else did you find anything about the stories of Rodney Nasus, Neil Stonechild, and Lawrence Wegner in relation to the song?
Yeah, I think what stood out to me quite a bit was a journalist named Dan Zakreski, who started making connections between the Saskatoon freezing deaths. And at first he was in disbelief as he was trying to like piece things together. But the Indigenous community kind of responded to him by saying like, oh yeah, this is what happens. And you didn't know about this. And we've tried to tell people, but they won't believe us. So there's like this gap in perception. I think earlier in the song, it's how we view our historical impact. And here it's a modern example of like two minds not being able to meet, with like the white community unwilling to believe people who are saying like these terrible things are being committed, these terrible things are being done to them.
Yeah. Well, and this is, and so I got to asking, I still have friends in Saskatoon. And so I asked a pal of mine today if he knew about this story. And he's like, of course I know about this story. Like, he's like, I've been hearing this story for decades. Mm-hmm. And he also told me that within a 10-day period during the COVID-19 quarantine in the spring of 2020, 3 First Nations people were killed by cops in Winnipeg, where Propagandy's from, in a 10-day period. So like when the COVID crisis was like raging just before the national protests in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna's killings as well, in the U.S., 3 First Nations people were killed in Saskatchewan, or in Winnipeg in Manitoba. So like that blew my mind. And you know, my friend wrote to me and he's like, yeah, this is still happening. This violence against First Nations people is still going on. We have police brutality problems in Canada as well. It's just that it's not as highly on display as the ones that are in the U.S. Were there any other like lyrical references or anything that you liked?
Yeah, I think the line, a descent that never ends. I mean, it's hopelessness. Like there's this grinding down of people. They're grinding down their displacement and their subjugation. And it seems like if you thought it was bad in history, well, it's going to continue on now in the present. And that line, I think, really hits me pretty hard.
And you have to survive it until you die.
Right.
Yeah, because it never ends until you're dead. And then when after you're dead, it's still going to keep going to your descendants. Another line that jumped out to me is, we've given the greatest gift, the Savior who will never rise. And you know that I'm interested in religion a lot. I have my other podcast, Classical Ideas, where I talk about religion with all kinds of people. And the greatest gift, the Savior who will never rise, is a very, it's like a punch in the face song, because the removal of First Nations culture over years in Canada is far too immense to talk about on this short show. But you know, the history of the Canadian residential school system to remove the Indian to quote unquote save the man. I mean, that disrupted the lives of over like 150,000 First Nations and Métis kids and their families between 1880, when the Canadian government stepped in to sponsor the re-education of First Nations kids to, bring them into the mainstream, whatever.
Right.
And that lasted until 1996. So the last residential school came out the same year as Let's Talk More Rock. And I also heard that the Canadian
Wow.
residential schools may have started by Catholic nuns as early as the 1600s, but that Canada's government officially stepped in to sponsor these. Now, this has backfired on them big time because it has created generations of pain that they are fully responsible for. And I know that Stephen Harper, the previous prime minister of Canada, had to issue a formal apology in 2008, and there was a restitution act that was implemented in 2007. But these residential schools were founded by Christian churches in collaboration with the Canadian government. And so when it talks about the Savior who will never rise, I mean, it's just so important to learn about residential school history to see what kids were allegedly given after being stripped of their families and their culture and their language, and everything that they possibly would have had growing up.
Yeah, the two other lyrics that connect with me there are, when you think of all you've lost, weigh it with what you've gained in trade. That and our handshake crushing bones. This song, lyrically, really reminds me a lot of Comply Resist on Victory Lap, because there's this, not sarcastic, but this this twisted narrative here, in which you have presented to a quote unquote uncivilized society being civilized, and of course the things that are civilizing it are ecological, cultural, and destruction.
Yeah. I mean, this is such a huge song, 2 minutes long, and it has, residential schools, police brutality, cultural destruction, annihilation, all in just a tiny little bit. And the thing that I appreciate most about this song is that Todd and Propaganda hold Canada's feet to the fire to, shine a light on some of these things. Because a band like Propaganda has fans. I saw a sold-out Propaganda show in London, England. So if you think about all those folks learning about these atrocities as well, I mean, the global impact of people learning about Neil Stonechild, Lawrence Wegner, and Rodney Nastis, I mean, that's huge. A curious person who goes on a rabbit hole is going to learn so much about how so many countries have so much work to do. So tell me a little bit about some of your teachable moments that you've got here.
So I think as a teacher, there's this unfortunate habit to talk about Indigenous peoples just in the context of history, in the context of the past, like people are already gone. So they're reduced to relics or artifacts. And this song focuses on the historical legacy, but also the present impact of settlers and colonizers. And I think it's their legacy. It's not legacy of Native Americans, but of those people who have indoctrinated and displaced and dehumanized them. I saw an article that said Craig Falcon, who's a Blackfeet tribal member, he's running for office in Montana. He stated that Native Americans are often dehumanized and portrayed as savages. And it seems like we get forgotten because America is ashamed or embarrassed about its treatment of us. And there's this inability to reconcile what America stands for in the past or in the present, and the identity, the values that we say we're founded on, but also with our treatment. And I think what's important for us to understand is to try to not necessarily think we have to feel guilt or shame, but to understand it. Sometimes getting into heavy history, people say it's just to make someone feel bad. But the purpose isn't about necessarily your feelings. It's to help understand a clear picture as possible. And for me, I met a teacher from Montana last year at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home in Virginia, and kind of at a distance following the crisis with missing Indigenous women in Canada. She brought up some incidents in Montana that I was unfamiliar with. So I put that completely in the context of Canada. And I didn't realize how much of an issue it was also here in the United States. Then understanding that I don't really understand very much, and hoping to learn more on my own.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting as well that we're talking in the midst of the wave of international protests in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, among so many others. You know, the pattern of killing of First Nations men, and in the case of Winnipeg, one of the victims in April 2020 is a 16-year-old girl. It's like this pattern of getting rid of them by Canadian police. You know, it's not something that's reported on widely here in the States. So, you know, as a Canadian friend once told me, Canada looks shiny on the outside, but they have a way of not letting their baggage be too widely exposed. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm super grateful to Propaganda for shining a light on this in their songs, because their reach is wide, and it's cool that they did so, you know. And I also found a CBC report that says that, which is a Canadian broadcast company, which found that at the hands of Winnipeg police, there was 11 Indigenous lives taken between 2000 and 2017. So more than half of all the lives taken at the hands of police in Winnipeg between 2000 and 2017 were Indigenous, and it's disproportionate to the population within the province and in the country for sure. So, and those three people that were killed in April 2020 are Aisha Hudson, who was 16, Jason Collins, who was 36, and Stuart Andrews, who was 22. So, you know, we all have a lot of work to do. So I found some YouTube comments about Bringer of Greater Things, which I found to be fun. One user wrote only a week ago that this is the best Propaganda song. I am a longtime fan, so it's difficult to say, but yeah, this is it. And that is a big commitment to say this is the best Propaganda song. Very heavy content. We could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
Someone else on YouTube wrote this is the best song on the album. So
it resonates with other people.
Absolutely. And, you know, I wasn't really expecting that. I went on YouTube to find some comments, and I was thinking like there wouldn't be that many comments. I know that the comments for the Cop Just Out of Frame episode were slim pickings.
Yeah.
But, you know, and then another one said, this is another YouTube comment from somebody who lives in Saskatoon. He says, when they played Saskatoon, they told us to go out to the Queen Elizabeth Power Station where the cops left Stone Child and take off our clothes and try to walk home and see how far we get. And then try to imagine another human being thinking it was possible for someone else to do that. And I think about how a bunch of the police officers who left Daryl, the guy who survived, out in the middle of nowhere, how they just dropped him off and they just went home to their families, and they didn't get fired for you know, another several years. So, and I think the cops who dropped off Stone Child in 1990 got fired in 2004. So they just kept working for like another 14 years. So it's pretty wild.
That last comment, I also think, speaks to what I mentioned before, how this band for me is an entertainment, right? It builds empathy and it builds understanding, and it hopes to humanize people. And hearing that like on a stage, you know, I'm sure that's got to be pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's far more than a band. Every song in this band is a story. This is a 2-minute song, and we've been talking forever. So why don't we go ahead and bring this in for a close? So I'm going to give this song a 4 out of 5. This is not my favorite Todd songs. Not one of my favorite Todd songs. I'm not going to reveal what those are yet. I have a few Todd 5s in mind, but man, if these lyrics aren't just incredible and gut-wrenching and brutal and important to look at squarely. So yeah, go ahead and tell me what you think about this.
I think it's an excellent track musically and lyrically. I think it shows the band's evolution and their experimentation. I'm going to give it a really strong, solid 3.5. Like, I really can't think of any critique I think everything really fits together. It's just that there are other mid-tempo melodic Todd tracks that hit a little harder for me. I also think that the song's brevity really works for it. If this were closer to 4.5 minutes, I probably don't think I would give it a 3.5, but I think that totally works.
I love how they didn't belabor this song as well. That's such a good point. Well, Keith, this has been a fantastic conversation about Bringer of Greater Things. Thanks again to Justin Santora. Check out his work. Find him on Instagram and on his website. And we'll see you next week.
See you.
Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propaganda, is created, hosted, and produced by Keith Goff and Greg Soden. Musical clips on this show are composed and performed by Propaganda. Artwork on the show is by Justin Santora, who can be reached at justinsantora.com. You can find us on Twitter at PropagandaPod and on Instagram at PropagandaPod. If you like the show, please drop a rating on your podcast app of choice and subscribe to receive future episodes. Tell your friends. Thank you so much for listening.
At the ending